Knowledge is power.
Reality is
Adjusting to not having my default be, PST time. So,
Of course, yes. What prompted the move, if I may ask?
so I've been a DJ and audio engineer for the last 10 years, and the lockdowns and the pandemic situation kind of took away my jobs. So it just kind of like catapulted this big series of events of changes in my life, and had a long-term relationship that split away. And so I just kind of looking, I'm about 29 now, almost 30. So
Yeah.
just kind of like, let's go somewhere else. Let's check it out.
Nice. I like that. You just
Yeah.
shuffle the deck and do something different. I did more of that when I was younger. I'm 65 now. I have a feeling I'm much more stationary or stabilized than I was. But I had some great moves like that when I was younger.
Right. I heard you. I was listening to you on another podcast, and you had mentioned kind of like a midlife crisis of sorts, to where you just kind of like shifted. You kind of just went a different way.
Yeah, that's right. So there are these strange, you could say, hairpin curves in life that are interesting to me, because we don't normally think of lives as doing that. There's even the extreme theory that no one changes.
Mm.
I'll buy that as long as we also remember that everybody changes. But the hairpin ones are really interesting to me.
Yeah.
How that happens.
Yeah, and then because at the moment it seems catastrophic, and you're like, what am I doing? And your whole sense of identity has just been, changed or crumbled or questioned or whatever it is. But then retrospectively, you're like, oh yeah, of course it was that way.
Yes, there is that. I was joking to a friend yesterday that my adulthood has been just alternating between midlife crises and second childhoods. That's all. That's all.
Yeah.
It's not exactly true, but there's something to it anyway. I like that kind of self-effacing
I like
humor.
that. Yeah, it definitely puts the finger on something there. There's something there. Well, cool, man. Yeah, I'm really thanks again for working with me to get this rescheduled. I was really looking forward to this talk, and I've been kind of like listening to you on some other podcasts, and I was listening to your talk at Google, and just like, oh yeah, I'm so excited to talk about these things. So
Fun. We can talk about anything. What do you like to talk about?
a little bit of everything. I mean, a few years back. So I actually kind of I've always been kind of fairly fascinated with just the edge of ideas, and just like what we're doing, like going very meta on kind of like this whole situation here, life. But and then a couple years back, I had a lot of kind of like mental health, depression, kind of came into this point of, wow, how do I better take care of myself? What am I doing incorrectly? What's going on? Like, so I start studying myself. I start studying what a self is. Start studying consciousness. I started
Wonderful.
just like through this kind of mental health journey, I got even more fascinated with just really like selfhood, and studying what it is that we do and why it is that we do it, and why it is that we matter, and how, and using your words, how does matter how does matter give rise
How
to
does it
matter?
mattering emerge from matter? Is
Yeah,
one
yeah.
more version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Or
it's,
how does matter
all of
become
it.
matter?
All of it really fascinates me. All of
Yeah.
it.
Ah, great. And most of the literature that deals with this question, what is a self, starts at the level of humans or maybe animals. It starts at the level of feelings and thoughts. But that's not our approach. In fact, the main guy I work with, this guy I've been working with for a quarter century, Terrence Deacon, compares that to trying to understand hair starting with porcupines. Yes, porcupine quills are hair. They're highly evolved and highly specialized. So there's a difference in our approach. And I was just thinking about it before the podcast started, that it's on the edge of pretentious to say it, but I'm going to say it. I realize I can actually just say it, which is that I'm not like other social scientists or life scientists. I go back to the origins. Now that sounds like some creepy sacred text citation, No, what I mean by it is that I'm what I call an originist, which is I'm operating on an assumption that's im- implied in science, but not necessarily practiced, and certainly not in consciousness studies, which is that the prior sciences have to explain what the later sciences assume. And until they do, we don't really know what we're talking about when we talk about something like consciousness or something, any of those high level uh, assumptions. So unlike most cognitive science researchers or even social scientists, we have to start from the chemical origins of trying.
Mm.
That selves are the only things that try. And we can imagine anything like a self. I can imagine that the river's trying to get to the sea or the computer is trying to help me out. But really, when you look at it, we're the only ones that try. And if you want to understand trying, which is it's an inescapable concept in the life and social sciences and an inapplicable concept in the physical sciences. That is, you can never talk about molecules trying, but you have to talk about living things trying. You have to be able to explain trying from its origins in chemistry. Explain no smoke and mirrors, just what is trying and how did it start? And actually, that's the reverse of the question. How it started will give you a better sense of what trying is.
Oh wow. Okay, so do you see is there a big gap between survival and trying? Because I know
No,
that's where
actually,
we
no.
explain.
So survival is actually the key to it, and we're we're living through a strange period in the sciences, in the life and social sciences, and that would include cognitive science and philosophy and all that, where we think we found the answer because we got evolution and then we got DNA. Well, DNA is not trying. You know, that stuff looks like snot. If you take it out of a body and put it on a table, it looks like snot. Okay, and it's not, and snot is even more alive than it. It's a bunch of chemicals, right? It's not about anything for anyone that is trying to do anything until it's in a living organism. But there's also this assumption that somehow, I mean, it's a very strange and loose and not scientific concept that somehow a new thing came into the universe called natural selection, and that somehow started life. Now, we know that's not the case. I mean, we have all these details about how evolution works and how it has worked historically in natural history, but we are still trying to figure out what the origins of life is. So
Mm.
obviously, it doesn't solve the problem. The struggle for existence is something that Darwin assumed. He declared that he had no explanation for it. He assumed a struggle for existence and then explained how that would speciate into different ways of struggling with respect to different environments. That's what he did. And he knew it. And people tried to say, didn't you just explain the origins of life? And he said, no, I didn't. I don't get to say that. Somehow we've forgotten that. So, and the struggle for existence, this is the most fundamental thing, which is that we have to struggle for our existence because things fall apart. It's the second law of thermodynamics. Things are moving towards disorder or getting all mixed up, and we have to keep ourselves in order. So I just started my day out here, and I don't have much scheduled, but I do have regenerating 240 billion cells today. And I'm going to do that without feeling it,
Mhm.
without thinking. I have to run in order to stay in place. I have to hustle to just keep myself alive. And that's true of all organisms. So that's where we have to explain how that kind of struggle to self regenerate could ever emerge from simple chemistry, not quantum mechanics or anything like that. We don't operate at that level. How it could ever happen by accident that we would get in the business of regenerating ourselves faster than we would otherwise degenerate.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. Okay, so how does your like your day-to-day work when you're actually studying this? Because it's perhaps I'm not super familiar with the real hard time definition of philosophy of science or anything like that, but I do see, science over here and philosophy over here. To me, philosophy is just so much more of the pondering side of things. So how do you take these
Great
questions
question.
and actually bring them into science?
Yeah. So I'm working with a scientist, and we debate whether I get to call myself a scientist or a science writer because of a way in which an assumption we make about science. Um, we think the scientific revolution started with empiricism in the Enlightenment. That is the bringing rigor to trying to figure out, to testing things out against reality. So philosophy was doing a lot of theorizing, and then they said, no, if you really want to do this stuff, you have to ground it in experiments. Um, so a lot of people assume, and scientists too assume that if you're not doing experiments, you're not a scientist.
Mm.
But actually, I think that there have been two scientific revolutions so far, and I think we need one more. In fact, I'm writing an article about it just now. So the first one was way back with, let's say, Pythagoras or Plato or Aristotle. It's bringing rigor to formalism. Formalism is all the ability to make mathematical and logical models, basically manipulating symbols and doing it for maximum coherence. Coherence means that you're not talking out both sides of your mouth. You're maintaining consistency. And that was the first scientific revolution. And a guy like Francis Bacon realizes it's not enough to do that. I mean, he can come up with really coherent theories that have no correspondence to reality. For example, I could say that everything in the universe is made from gelatin. That's a perfectly coherent theory. Or I could, more popularly, I could say it's all good. Yes, it's a perfectly incoherent theory, and yes, if you define good broadly enough to include bad, sure, it's true, But so they realized, Francis Bacon realized, no, you gotta make this stuff correspond to sense data. So that's the second scientific revolution. What I think is missing is a third one, which brings rigor to categorization. And this comes out of some work by a philosopher out of the early American philosopher, Charles Sanders Peirce, who points out that there are actually three basic kinds of logical moves: deduction, induction, and abduction.
Okay.
Abduction. So, and I could explain more about that, but the heart of it is, right now we categorize pretty damn casually, especially on these big intractable questions like life and mind and motivation. So if you talk to motivation is the core currency in the life and social science. It's basically trying, and we assume that there's something inside of an organism that would have an appetite or a will or a motivation that would trigger some kind of behavior. But if you ask a social scientist, I mean, they live and breathe motivation. If you ask them what a motivation is, they can't tell you. They know what a motivation does, and they mostly identify motivations by their consequences. If I see you making effort, I'll assume that you have a motivation. Well, to me, that's no more rigorous than saying you have a soul. You can give it a spiritual sounding name or a technical sounding name. Doesn't matter. Naming is not explaining. So that's where the originism comes in, which is, if you really want to understand a phenomenon, you have to explain how it emerged from what preceded it.
Yeah. It is interesting, the assumptions that we assumptions / leaps that we're like, oh, okay, yeah, and keep going. Next one. What do you think? Like this third stage of science, do you think that we're at a place where the current rules of science, the current edges of science, so to say, are kind of constraining us from answering important questions? Like, how do we, when we're going to expand into this, next stage of science, what are we going to lose from this? Like, what are we going to have to not only lose but add in? I understand that's not a specific question.
No. It's a good question. I mostly don't think we have to add anything. We have to remember something about the sciences. Right now, they're kind of multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary. That is, Francis Bacon basically said, we're going to send out a search party and do all this empirical research, and each search party is going to be exploring some patch of reality and trying to understand what's going on there. And we've been doing that now for 400 years, 350 years. And the patches have expanded and they have encroached on each other in delightful ways. So we get this sense that there are parallels, for example, between what animals do and what humans do, it's all sorts of parallels. But it's still, it's it's transdisciplinary at best. I actually am arguing that it needs to be sequidisciplinary. That is, the sciences actually are stacked in order of appearance. The universe is 14 billion years old, and for the first 10 billion years, that's 2/3 of its existence, we see nothing that needs to be explained in terms of trying. Nothing, I mean, not in this neck of the woods anyway. We haven't seen anything yet. No doubt it happened elsewhere earlier or whatever, but trying seems to be something different from nothing but chemistry. That is, if you're playing in science, I take science to be a campaign to find natural explanations for all natural phenomena, which means that we can't say, well, there's some magical thing that was added that explains this thing. You can't do that. If you do that for one thing, you can't. You could do it to anything. I can explain lightning by the lightning wanter, or something like that. The magical, invisible, unknowable, supernatural lightning wanter. So if I can't do it, if I do it anywhere, I can't do it. I do it everywhere. So science is just that campaign. So that means that we have to be able to explain emergences with no smoke and mirrors, no abstractions that allow us to smuggle in something to explain it. And so that's what I'm basically arguing. And once we have explained it, we can reduce to it. So there's this idea that all there is in the universe, all we ever see is, let's say, we drop it down to the lowest level, subatomic particles or field forces, whatever it is. Therefore, all explanations have to be reduced to that, or else they don't make any sense. And I'm saying, no, actually, that's not true. I'm an emergent reductionist, which is to say that once we have really explained that how physical work changes, the likeliness of this happening versus that happening, once we've explained how a phenomena emerges, then we can reduce to that explained phenomena. And until then, we can't. So, and then in a way, that's a standard that makes some sense. Obviously, we can't do it to the pre-Einsteinian or pre-quantum level yet. That's not this season's researchers' project. We don't know enough yet to be able to do that. But we at least need to mark what we don't have explained, and we don't do that very well in especially cognitive science. So to give you a quick illustration, in cognitive science, the hard problem is, if we are just these cause and effect mechanisms, if animals are basically mechanisms like machines, or computers, popular notion these days, then how do we explain experience, or what they call qualia, the feeling of redness? I call that the made harder problem. Yes, if you assume we're nothing but machines that don't try to do anything, you're going to have a hell of a time explaining qualia or experience from that. But that's not where we started. We were trying. If you don't even have an explanation for what trying is, don't expect much of explaining consciousness out of computation, and the same's true with the free will debate. That thing will go on back and forth. The determinist saying, you are nothing but determinist chemistry, which is funny because you actually means that you're not just that. It's a distinctive category of thing. And then the free will people say, no, obviously you have will, and we're arguing that it's got a kind of autonomy. Well, if we don't know what will is, once again, if we don't know what motivation is from its origins in chemistry, what are we even talking about? It's this unknown quantity that everybody thinks they know. But they only know by its consequences. We see willful behavior, but we can't explain it. We know it happens in bodies. We know it is instantiated in chemistry, but we haven't explained what it is. So that's where our work has been primarily focused. Oh, and a while ago you asked, how do we do this work? Well, yeah, sorry for getting off track and for perhaps having too much coffee. I'll say this one last thing.
No, you're fine.
I tend to get a little long. But that's because there's a lot of different things to hold in the air at the same time.
I'm here for it, man. I love it.
Okay, good. So I think that natural philosophy was the right name for the field, and that science is a great name for it. But actually, I think that we should keep in mind that science is not just testing things out. Tests are hell expensive. So that means that what you have to actually do is prioritize your testing, which means that you're shopping among interpretations of reality that are worth testing and not worth testing. So you cannot be a scientist without engaging in this fundamental topic of shopping among interpretations. What is the best fitting interpretation for reality? And that tends among scientists to get the short shrift, as if that's not part of science, as if science is just lab testing, or as if we leave that to the philosophers. No, we're still all shopping among interpretations, and then we test them out. And I'm arguing that the third scientific revolution just would remember that we're a little loose about our categorization of things like motivation or will or love. So my approach our approach, the one I got by working with Terrence Deacon, is different from that. I actually have an explanation for both junkyards and love from the origins of life from chemistry. As I have a definition of love that comes out of my origins of life explanation. And no, it ain't poetry. It ain't poetry at all.
Okay, what is it? How would you explain love?
Well, it's doing dedicated work to maintain something you're dependent upon. Now, where you draw the line and start calling it love, which is a feeling we associate with animals and particularly with humans, that's one thing. But if we're talking about a certain kind of behavior from its origins, what I mean by dedicated work is, of all the things you could do, you constrain yourself to certain work. And that's actually our explanation for motivation or will or trying anyway. That is, I'm not my breakfast. My trying is not my breakfast. That breakfast could have been used for any number of things, including starting a fire that burns down my house, whatever. It tends to do more damage than not. Energy gradients tend to do more damage than not. But I am a constraint that channels that energy into effort to do what? To regenerate that constraint. That is, I got a to-do list today, but actually the to-do list is a narrowing of possibilities. I could dither all day, but instead I limit what I do all day to certain things that will enable me to limit what I do tomorrow to keep myself going. I am actually an emergent constraint. That's what I think of. And when I'm dead, that emergent constraint is as gone as a popped bubble or a whirlpool from yesterday. I mean, that I don't actually think there's any. I am a limitation on what happens. I am not something added that makes that happen. It's a way that chemical interactions can actually limit what happens. Love would also be that. It's doing dedicated work. It's being deliberated or deliberate. That is, I'm unliberating myself. I'm saying to maintain access to this thing or to maintain something I care about, I have to do dedicated work. And how do I know that I'm dependent on it? If you remove it, am I, as Paul McCartney said, suddenly not half the man I used to be? That is, you can tell when something has failed to maintain something that it depends upon because it becomes degenerate in some ways. I don't mean degenerate in the psychological or, I just mean we're hobbled. So this is going on from the very origins of life. Now, I want to name it by another name. I think that love and addiction refer to the same behavior. Ooh. The difference is connotation. If I think a relationship is going to turn out well for someone, I'll say that's love. If I think it's not going to turn out well for them, I'm going to say it's addiction. And I, as a result, I'm busy a lot of my time stripping the connotations off of words. For example, I would say that I am an incredibly lucky guy because I happen to really like my addictions. I have some addictions that I just have killer addictions. I love them. I don't mean killer. That is, I think they're going to sustain me as long as possible.
The opposite
I think
of killer,
they maintain me. I don't feel like half the man I used to be, or like I'm going to be deprived of them. I mean, of course I am in the end, but or in my decline. But anyway, boy, was that a lot. I hope that was okay.
It was so good. I feel like you poked so many different parts of my my brain to spit out different ideas. I was thinking about was thinking about panpsychism
Yeah, yeah,
actually.
yeah,
Do you have any what's your opinion on panpsychism? Basically, what is it that matter gives rise to consciousness, or matter is an innate feature, or consciousness is an innate feature of matter, I think is what it is. Correct me
yeah.
if I'm wrong.
So there are three main moves that are alternatives to the emergentist move that I take.
Mm,
So you got this basic question that science has somehow dodged for all these years. What is trying and how did it start? And as a result, the culture wars are at a standstill because science really doesn't have an answer to that question, and fundamentalism does. Fundamentalism's answer is Mysterian. That's what we call that school of thought, which is there's some special thing that causes it. It's the equivalent of that lightning story I told you before. And believe it or not, we have the same thing going on in science. That is, you can be a Mysterian in science too. Um, I would say Dawkins is borderline Mysterian.
mm,
Um, he's actually an equivocator, and most Mysterians are. That means sometimes he's talking as if genes actually are trying to do something. Genes are patterns, patterns within molecules. So genes are trying to do something, but then he also backtracks on that and says, I don't really mean that. I just mean that it's the equivalent of that. And that explains it. So in a way, he's a Mysterian, but in a way, he's also what we call an eliminativist. An eliminativist says, on this question, what is trying and how does it start? Wrong question. There is no trying. You may try to think that there's trying, but there is no trying. It's a trying is a figment, and to which we respond, figment to whom? Because there's no you don't trick molecules. The atoms are not tricked. They cannot be deceived. They're not trying to do anything. They're not busy interpreting their situation
right.
to achieve their goals. So when you say that stuff, you're talking out both sides of your mouth. So I've named two so far. Mysterian is you come up with some black box term that explains it, like God or a
Mhm.
higher power that wants something or whatever. Eliminativism says wrong question, there is no trying. You can try to believe there's trying, but there isn't. Choose determinism is another way of laying out the hypocrisy of that. What the fuck, So, and then
Yeah.
the other version of it is it's a wrong question because everything has always been trying, and that's what you mentioned as panpsychism.
Yeah.
Um, and no, I would say, I just find it completely bogus. Another one of the many dodges we get to the question makes fine poetry.
Yeah.
I'm happy to believe the whole cosmos is trying to achieve things or whatever. I indulge in that kind of romantic notion. That's my note. That's my definition of romance. Is that the universe is somehow aligned with us. It's got our back. It wants whatever we happen uh, to also want.
Mhm.
I love that stuff, but as escapism, I don't buy. No, I don't think that's true. I don't think the universe wants anything. I don't think there's anything outside the universe that wants anything, which is why I'm burdened with the emergentist question. How did it start? Because it wasn't there before now. If
Mhm.
you could say that you're going the route of Aristotle or the Pet Rock people of the 1960s. Did you ever hear about the Pet Rock Fad? Did you
No,
ever hear
no,
about this? No,
no. I don't
there's
think
a
so.
while when you go out, it was a fad that people were buying pet rocks, and they were just these rocks that came to you in a nest of straw in a box. So what I'm saying is, it's a form of animism, um, uh,
Mhm.
much like Aristotle saying that a rock falls to the ground because it wants to arrive at its proper position, that it belongs further away from God than humans.
Oh.
A fine notion for his time. Bless his pointed head. I mean, it was.
Right, right, right.
I wouldn't have come up with it at that time. I'm impressed, but at the same time, no, it's not true.
Mhm.
Some things try and other things don't, and we know it, and we should admit it. And anyone who's an eliminativist should put their money where their mouth is and start talking like without using any words that imply motivation, will, appetite, preference. If you think that it's all chemistry, go ahead, describe it like that, live it. And if you think that it's all alive, then start taking a little bit better care of your pet rock and LED lights um, because otherwise you're saying, it's you're relying on um, it being counterintuitive. So there's wishful thinking, but I also think there's dreadful thinking, which is it must be true because you don't want to believe it.
Mm,
And I think both are bogus. We want to believe all sorts of
mm.
things, and that's irrelevant to whether they're true.
So
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 yeah, go ahead.
what is the? It makes me think of just like the line between what humans do, acting as if versus truth. I
No,
think about.
that's a great question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you know where I was going with that, feel free to expand because I feel like that is a lot of like where our arguments go. We're arguing over is this true or not true, and a lot of it is kind of not even trying to prove that. It's trying to say how do humans act as if at this point in history or whatever.
Yeah, so yes, that's a big deal to me because actually the last 2 years I've been working on a whole other project that's very much related but you might think indirectly. Um, I call it psychoproctology,
Okay.
and I'm trying to find a more objective definition of asshole.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that.
And I'm trying to figure out how to stop or prevent assholery without becoming an asshole in the process. Um, uh, and once again, I'm an originist. That is, I have to explain a-holes from their origins. If I want to understand if I want a good definition of them, I can't just pull it out my butt, based on who I don't like. One of the big questions for me, one of the ways I frame the question of objectivity is what is a butthead, since it can't just be whoever I happen to butt heads with.
Right.
But it gets me into this whole. I think there are plenty of nasty animals by our standards. There's plenty of predators and parasites and all that. But being an a-hole is actually a human thing, and it comes out of having language, which language would make us a really freaked out animal. If you compare what a dog could worry about at night before going to bed with what a human could, we got way more real and imaginary threats and missed opportunities to consider and way more means to consider. And we are extremely anxious, and we are also an extremely evasive organism, because language also gives us a way to rationalize dismissing anxious thoughts.
Mm,
So that's confirmation bias, is basically what it is. That is, we're especially anxious, and we have good ways of avoiding things. We have skillful ways of avoiding things that we don't want to think about. Um, uh, and confirmation biases. So all organisms have to interact selectively with their environments. They have to take in food and not poison. That is, like I said earlier, energy is volatile stuff. My breakfast could burn down my house. So when it's running through my body, it is also degenerating me. So I have to take in the right energy gradients and not the wrong ones. And if you apply that at the level of language, you get confirmation bias. I want to take in the ideas that regenerate my mojo, not the ideas that degenerate my mojo. That's confirmation bias. And
mm,
then, by my definition, normal people recognize confirmation bias as a problem they have to manage, and a-holes think of confirmation or treat confirmation bias as a solution to all their problems. So what's going on here related to your idea? So we will wonder whether we're talking to someone who is just trying to win, and we will wonder whether we should um, humor people or tell them what we really think.
mm.
Our best guesses, which is there's a huge difference between honesty and truth that was completely overlooked in the last election, which is he tells it like it is. He's honest. No, that obviously you can honestly believe untrue things. That's not, you can honestly believe things that aren't true. We see plenty of evidence of it. I mean, it's a kind of method acting. We got this from Michael Cohen, who says after that he used to be able to put himself in a fit of complete outrage at someone for something he knew that someone didn't do.
Mhm.
We're perfectly good at that sort of stuff. So all the theatrics around this, all the melodrama, all the potential for falling into what I call infallibility battles. An infallibility battle is either you turn out to be right about everything and I turn out to be wrong about everything, or vice versa. It's like a death match about
Yeah.
who's right about everything. It'd be like where if I said, wow, you thought that Green Day album came out in 96? You don't know anything, do you? it's that you can fall into these things so incredibly easily. And why? Because I think humans are trying to adapt in three different arenas. We have to adapt to reality. That's a long-term goal. It's the same goal that all organisms have to deal with. The one rule is adapt to reality or die. Um, but we also are primarily and most pressingly adapting to our own emotions. That is, trying to maintain comfort in our own skin.
Mm.
And in between that, we're adapting to society, which can either give us reality checks or can pander to our need to feel comfort in our own
Okay.
skin. So I distinguish these as um, adapting to the likely story, that is the realistic one, the socially liked story, the popular one, and the likable story, the story that feels good in my own skin.
Mm. Yeah, I'm thinking about how the self is expressed in each, like,
Yeah.
all three of these, but kind of two of them, and it comes into reality as the third one or whatever. I think, have you read much Carl Jung?
A little, enough
Yeah,
to know what he's talking about, but not enough to claim any detailed understanding.
right, right. I'm mostly just super fascinated with him. It's incredibly like it's so I don't even know if dense is the word. It makes me think about my own experience so much
Yeah.
as I'm reading it or listening to it that it's like I gotta pause it sometimes. But I was thinking about how I think in one of his books, I think it was Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, he describes kind of his mother, and after a while he establishes like her number two personality versus her number one personality, and like who she would come out with in this societal like there's basically like two different sides of ourselves, our internal experience and then who we act out as in our interactions with one another.
Yeah.
And he would just start to point it out like very blatantly, very bluntly in this book, like, oh, this is mom as her version two or as her personality two side of herself. And it's very fascinating, like our internal experience being so different often than our external experience. And
Right. Yeah.
the
Yeah. Also, I would say that our external depends on who we're around. Um,
true.
uh, yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've ever thrown a party where you have friends coming in from different parts of your life,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes difficult to know who to be in that situation because you've been sort of different with different people.
Mm-hmm.
My parallel to it is a mixing board. As I got all these traits that I'm trying to mix in the right blend for the particular situation I'm in.
Yeah.
And I can be too much or too little on any of them, which is fundamental to my work. As a lot of people say, always be this way to the max, what I call moral maxing. No, it's not like that. You can. My peace of mind comes from thinking, from being from wondering whether I'm too much or too little of any particular trait at any time. That's the
Seriously.
closest I'm going to get to peace of mind,
Yeah.
is if I'm wondering equally whether I was too assertive or not assertive enough.
Yeah.
I'm watching both sides of the winding road. I don't want to just try to avoid one of them. So it's like a mixing board of different qualities that you bring out in different situations. Um, and and so the number one, or the social persona, this was a big question during the Enlightenment. Um, Diderot was interested in this. The question of whether, do you wear different masks over your face, or are you nothing but masks?
Ooh.
Um, uh, and do you have an authentic self? And my answer is no, I don't. That is, I'm more molten than that.
Fluid.
And I can actually explain why also in terms of origins. That is, I could explain why we would have the impression that there is a core authentic self, but also why we would get that by other means. So I mean, it's a whole other piece of the work I do, which I could
Uh,
describe briefly if you wanted it.
yeah, yeah. Okay, go ahead and describe briefly, and then actually, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead. I want to hear that.
Okay.
I wanna hear
All right. So um, language enables me to describe or detail any model of anything, including myself. So what happens with language is I can imagine stepping out of myself and seeing myself and then describing myself.
Mm.
So I think of this was early work of mine, the four eyes that make up a mind. The first eye is just being. It's just It's I to the zeroth power, I call it. It's just, it's what we have in common with all animals. We're operating on habits.
Isn't
Now, an
this? Yeah.
animal's habits or a plant's habits may not be learned. In our case, they're learned, and we are in the habit making business. That is what consciousness is for. It's for making habits. Consciousness is not a computer, it's a virtual computer generator. Anything that I cannot resolve ends up rising to consciousness. And once I can resolve it into a habit, I will. I will turn it into a habit and stop thinking about it. That's what consciousness is for, from my perspective. And it's deeply emotive. That is, it's triggered by doubt. So I wrote a whole book, Doubt, a User's Guide, or Doubt, a Natural History. Um, because I think doubt, yeah, so that's what rises to consciousness. That's the interesting stuff. Okay, but I to the zeroth power is just the running behavior. It's my behavior, most of it by habit, including habits of consciousness about how to turn things into habits. But I'll set that aside. I to the first power is my ability to tell a running, unexamined story about myself. So, for example, I could say I'm of Jewish descent, or I'm a people person, or I'm verbal, or something like that. But so that's me stepping out to describe myself. But I can keep that going. So I could then go out an order of iteration and say, I like to think that I'm a people person, which is me telling a story about the narrator telling the story about my behavior.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's I squared, and it's actually where science gets interesting. The science is where because once you see that you are telling stories, you can question the stories in a way you can't. If I simply said what I call second guessing myself, I am a I'm a good person, and I've checked with myself, and I agree with myself that I'm a good person. So that would be one thing. Second guessing really starts with I squared, where I can say, wait, I like to say that I'm a good person, which raises a question. And then ions, I mean, this was early work when I was punning ad nauseum, but ions was where you recognize that for every story you tell about yourself, another story could be told about the teller of that story. And that basically you'll bonk, you'll run out of steam on what are called orders of inference. So I could say, I like to say, or I often say that I like to think that I'm a people person. At that point it gets kind of squirrely. But what you do get from the recognition that you could keep on telling different stories about yourself out layer after layer is that you're guessing who you are. So I have a real problem by now. Major red flags when anybody tells me that's not what I was doing, or that's not what I'm not a game player, or any of that self-description. I know why we would do it. It would be convenient, and it's even convenient to take someone's word for it. But that talk is walkism, the assumption that what I say about myself is an accurate description of what's going on with me. Totally bogus to me. If someone says I've got integrity, I know that they haven't given a moment's thought to what integrity is. It's just good bling, so they're going to wear it. It's what the other cool kids are wearing. So yeah. I mean, I've had Trump supporters simply come out of the box saying I'm a critical thinker, and you can tell they have no idea what critical thinking is. They haven't thought about it at all, but they want to tell you they are, because why? It's ornamentation. I mean, it's what the cool kids are wearing. It gives you cred, so why not say it?
Right.
So when someone says to me, "Don't tell me how I feel," they're right. I'm not in a position to tell them what they feel. They're not. I'm not an authority, but neither are they. I never can tell anybody, don't tell me how I feel, like I'm the authority. I mean, obviously, we know that there are plenty of people who don't know what they're feeling. What, am I exempt from that? Of course not. No, I'm not. So you get to have your guess about what I'm feeling. I get to have mine, but no, you don't get to pull rank on me just because you're inside yourself. Yes, you're inside yourself. That makes you both more credible and less credible.
Yeah. Right. We get really trapped. We get trapped in our selfhood in a lot of ways, and it kind of like hinders the ability to, I don't know, solve problems or really stay on the surface. It's a lot of. I feel like so much of your work is probably map versus territory, woods versus forest. Sort of like we miss the point. Where we think we're doing this thing.
Yeah. Though I would say we are trapped in our selfhood. Yeah. Every organism is hustling for it on its own behalf. We are all selfish in the sense like bluish. That is, we're to some degree or another, we are going to prioritize ourselves. So I have no use for this version of things that says selfhood is the problem. Get over yourself. No, I'm very interested in getting over myself. I'm an ironist. I'm an ironist not just by style or tradition. I'm from Jewish stock, but because I actually think irony is the only adaptive response to the clusterfuck of switchbacks and reversals that are ontologically real. That is, we know that there are reversals in the universe and we are tracking them. So there will be times when we're heading in one direction because it's going in that direction, and we will want to track back the other direction, and we will miss. That is, there will be times when I prematurely change my mind, or post-maturely change my mind. There will be slapstick. What I'm saying is, in a world that has reversals, what's adaptive in one situation will be maladaptive in another, and we're just guessing. We're trying to figure out when to be there, which means that it's going to be slapstick. So this idea that I got an authentic self, or that the solution is to stop caring about myself, I have no use for that stuff anymore. And this is after years of digging Buddhism. And I lived for 7 years on the world's largest hippie commune where there was a whole lot of selflessness. Now I'm trying to figure out when to be more self-assertive and when to be less self-assertive, when to jut my arms as you're a DJ, when the crowded dance floor, it's not, the property lines are not marked out. Everybody would like the freedom to move wherever. I got to figure out where to jut out my elbows and where to tuck them in. And the idea that, okay, everybody on the count of three, stop being a self, just forget it. It's just so laughable. It's not going to happen. I'll become selfless when I die. Okay, that's what. It's on my calendar, but it's just
I will eventually meld into the selflessness.
That's right. Later.
I like that you brought it into the world of DJing, because I was actually thinking too. I'm very fascinated with kind of the internet and social media, and like the next layer. It gives us this whole other layer of ego or self that we can be, or say we are this. We say we'll share our highlight reel, and a lot of times we'll get caught up in thinking that's what our life should look like. So when it doesn't match up to our highlight reel, so to say,
I love it.
It creates quarrels with us, and I was also thinking, so me as a DJ, and me as a, as I get older, I really try to figure out, like, how do I take my creative side and put it into like this artistry version of myself? Like, how do I, like this? So I have kind of an alias, Jacob from the internet. I used to be known as DJ Kronos, and I've melded it into Jacob from the internet, and it's this cool thing that. And I'm always practicing it. I'm not very, very good at it, but I think if I continue to do it, where I can get on stage and I kind of have this like internal, all right, I'm showing up as Jacob from the internet. Like, I'm not just Jacob. And it helps me be an entertainer. It helps me step outside of myself. It helps me like be more of a goofball, tell more jokes. I'm present. And I look at people like in WWE wrestling, like The Rock. There's this scene in this movie where he kind of explains where he's being polite and he's talking with these people, and they kind of tick him off, and eventually he's like, "Do you smell what The Rock?" He gets all into his high up, smell what The Rock is cooking, and then he explains that's kind of, it is me, but it's this amped up version of myself, and he's doing it for entertainment purposes. And I think about how we, common people, all have kind of a version of this with our social media presence. I think it goes over a lot of our heads. I think I'm very cognizant of it because I don't want to bullshit myself, and I think I have in the past before I really started studying this selfhood and like how it makes me act and stuff. So what do you think about this social media?
It's very related to kind of a central thesis for me, because I'm trying to figure out asshole prevention. And I think the fundamental tool I have found for asshole prevention is what I'll call optimal illusion, or safe escapism, or kidding yourself in ways that help more than harm. So it's not just for our public presentation. A lot of it is for ourselves. We're saying what we need to hear. We're adopting a persona. And I don't think it's very different from what we do in a religious context. That is, we go into a
Okay.
religious place. So I was just noticing the other day that prayer, we never really look at how prayer presents is a kind of virtual signaling. You don't have to pray out loud, but the prayer is a virtual signal to yourself as you come across as humble and supplicating and respectful and all of that sort of stuff. We don't tend to focus on it that much. I've written articles about gods, dogs, and blogs and how it's related to this, which is we need more audience than we can get these days, especially because what's in shorter supply is demand. That is why, because everybody's out creating now that we have the social media. That is, and not only that, there's an accumulation of past creativity that is piling up at this point. So your chances of being found are low. But in a way, when I started blogging, I've now written over 1,000 articles and I have some audience. But when I started, I had to engage in strategic gullibility. I had to pretend that there was an audience that gave a shit what I said. And I love that. And I don't think that's very different from having a dog or praying to God. Just imagine you got an audience. But the thing is, we have to do this stuff carefully. I'm interested in safe escapism. I'm saying that entertainment and escapism are a human necessity. Given language, we are way too anxious. We could not possibly be realistic all the time. Our brains would fry. It's just not workable. So we need to take these pit stops of where we get our mojo replenished. And they can take all sorts of forms. They can take the form of virtue signaling online. They can take the form of masturbation. They can take the form of belonging to a church where you believe that you guys have got something true and wise and real, and that you're virtuous and all of that. But in a way, I'm dealing with the same question they were dealing with iconoclast, the original iconoclast. I mean, it's an issue that comes up over and over in cultural history, which I would describe this way: is virtual virtue a virtue or a vice? Is virtual virtue? So me posing as though I'm virtuous, or a stud in bed, or I think of WWF. I think of porn as the counterpart to porn is to libido what WWF is to aggression.
Yes,
Okay, so we got all these mediums that we can do it in. That's virtual vice. Another question: is virtual vice a virtue or a vice? But what I want to say is, it's a virtual virtue. It's a virtue when it motivates real virtue, and it's a vice when it motivates and it's a substitute for real virtue. If I come out of a movie where I feel aligned with the hero, and the poor person asks me for some money, and I say, fuck no, I just gave in the theater, I just saved all of Rwanda, so that was the issue for Abraham. It was the issue for the Islamic movement, this whole thing about false idols. It was an issue for Luther. He brought it up as frequent communion, which is people going to church and absolving themselves and then being nasty all week long. They're all dealing with the same thing. So anyway, I believe that we have perfect models for how to engage in optimal illusion. When I watch a movie, I totally believe it. I'm right in it. I am Don Cheadle saving Rwanda, or I am the hero. But if you tap me on the shoulder, I know for sure that I'm not Don Cheadle. I know where I am, and when I turn the thing off, I get back to reality. It's not how far out I go into self-indulgence as DJ Kronos or whoever. It's whether I know to come back. And I've been to a Trump rally because seeing fascism up close was on my bucket list. I went to one in Tupelo, Mississippi. I swear that thing was just like a heavy metal concert. People are it's all cosplay. People go out for a night of entertainment. They're going to chant along with lyrics they're not thinking about. They like the lyrics just because they're badass. The only difference between a Trump rally and I don't know the current bands of that kind of the counterpart, but you could find them. Let's say it's like a DJ night out. The only difference is that the DJ night out, when people are done, they get their cars in their parking lot and they return to reality. That's the only difference. The problem with the Trump rally is they basically, and there's something to it. They say, I can get even more juiced on this.
Yeah.
if I pretend I found something more real than reality.
Mm. And then they
That's
kind of keep stuck to that reality when if they leave the concert, so to say, they leave
no,
the
they
rally and they're still
they
on their
come away. They
phone
think
in the Facebook groups.
that's right. So you, I'm not saying you have to do it by going to rallies. You could do this online too.
Okay.
And that's the problem. So it's not optimal illusion. That's where illusion gets dangerous. We have to continue to return to reality. Adapt to reality or die is the only rule for 3.8 billion years. I don't see us as having somehow escaped that one. So I'm all into posing. I love posing, and I also can say that my life's been lucky because I've had to do less of it. And then I realized around 50, I actually could afford to do less of it because I actually don't need status. I have money from by other means, so I actually don't need status in order to put food on my table. It's an incredibly
Great.
dumb, lucky situation.
Yeah.
And as a result, this is who I am all the time. I don't actually brace myself for a podcast interview.
Uh,
This is who I am. I'm not thinking about my ideas. I'm living them. There's it's a kind of seamless relationship between the ideas and the practice. And this is how I talk, but that's just the luxury of not having to humor people. And this relates to love for you young folk. In, People often fall into the pattern of assuming they need a partner for lots of reasons that some of it is hormonal certainty. At your age, I couldn't resist. Um, some of it is also social pressure or social encouragement. That's changing, but it's changing in complicated ways. Love songs are still this about the fantastic urge to merge and how it feels when you merge, or how bitter you feel in breakup and how a breakup proves that the other person was wrong or unkind or immoral, sort of stuff like that. So you still get all of that. But what I'm noticing is any encumbrance, any obligation to an external source is going to constrain you. And what you're looking for is constraints that grow you in the directions you want to grow, but you can get them lots of different ways. And partnership is a complicated way to do that. For example, I was married for 16 and a half years, great marriage, but we live in the modern world where there are lots of lifestyle choices. And by happenstance, we sort of diverge to where what I thought what was a priority for me to do was disappointing to her and vice versa. So we released ourselves from it and we thank each other for the freedom we got from it. What I want to say is that love means doing dedicated work to maintain something you depend on. And you got to be careful what you love because that is going to constrain your work. It's going to mean that you will be spending effort doing something, keeping up appearances, for example. I think there's an element of that in partnership. That is, you have to work hard to maintain in the other person the sense of your reliable fascination with them. That's a major obligation. It's wonderful. Wow. Bless it if that's what you want. But to walk into such encumbrances, I think there's something to minimizing encumbrances if you are going to pay attention to reality. We also know that people can fall right off a cliff by minimizing encumbrances. You can become, I forget the guy. You can, if you're unconstrained, you can believe all sorts of crap and really fall apart. So wiring up the right external constraints to support your internal constraints. That is, my internal constraints are the source of my behavior. They're what limits my behavior to what I do and instead of what I don't do. And I have a bunch of internal constraints and I want to align them with the external constraints that help me grow in the directions I bet I should grow. They're just bets. I could be wrong about where I should grow, but that's the thing. But anyway, to be picking up constraints haphazardly or because other people are doing it, dangerous thing to do at 29. I know a whole lot of people who are 50 and can't believe, why the hell did they choose that? Why did they let themselves fall into that thing? There's a poem by Philip Larkin who was, he says, he married her to keep her from getting away. Now she's there all day. Damn. And that's, I don't mean that gender specific. I know a bunch of women who said, about who you can say, she married him to keep him from getting away. Now he's there all day.
Right. Yeah, wow, that's actually very profound. I think that pokes me personally too. I like it. I I know we had agreed on an hour. Do you have a few more minutes? I don't want
I
to
have a
steal your
few more
time.
minutes. Yeah, yeah.
I was curious. I really wanted to ask you. I don't know if I feel that it is like the capital T truth. If it's of everything. I'm very intrigued by the stoned ape theory and that realm of. Like how language was born. I feel like there's a lot of overlapping there. So maybe disregard stoned ape theory,
No,
but
that's totally fine. Are we talking? I actually don't know the theory. Is it the idea that
oh
we got into psychedelics and pot and all that?
yeah. So
Yeah.
we climbed out of trees and we started following the cows and flipping over the manure and we ate it and it was psilocybin and over the course of a
Not
lot of
okay.
years it's
Okay.
kind of
Good. So yeah. No, I have some comments about this.
oh okay. So because I think that language. I don't know if I think this. I'm fascinated by the thought of language perhaps coming out of like the downstream effects of this. But go on.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So the problem with explaining the origins of language is that we don't have a lot of data. There's a fair amount of stakes in it. That is, anytime we're talking about social behavior and its origins, there's going to be people who care whether it's this way or that. You find a lot of that in evolutionary psychology, for example. It's a touchy subject. And on top of that, there are too many theories. There's also a problem in evolutionary psychology because they're actually not looking at how they assume random variation. And if you can explain why something would be useful, if you can name a use for something, then that's as good as an explanation. If it's useful, natural selection would have generated it. That's not as much the problem with the evolution of language. But here, I'm a stoner. I almost never drink alcohol, but I get stoned almost every night. I play bass and I play bass in funk, jazz, soul bands and sing. And I practice stoned, often watching extended run uh, uh, TV while I'm doing it. I have mixed feelings about that addiction, but mostly by now I like it, or at least I'm settled into it. It's a productive enough time. I've actually gotten my chops together doing that. And I don't have that feeling about getting stoned. I used to be worried that it would injure my brain. I don't find evidence that it does. And my neuroscience buddy says no. It's a very short-lived drug. I've also done all those psychedelics, ayahuasca, mushrooms, all that sort of stuff. Um, uh, I I do not subscribe to that assumption about it, and I can give some reasons why. You can get animals stoned and they don't end up with language. Um, and I mean that's a piece of evidence. I'm not saying it's conclusive,
Yeah.
but Deacon, this guy I work with, he spent his first 20 years not on the question of the origins of trying, but the origins of language, how it evolved. And I read his book before. He wrote a book called The Symbolic Species, The Coevolution of Language and Brain. Um, and I cried when I first read it. It was before I met him, before we started jamming together for
Wow.
25 years. I cried not because it was moving, but because it was way the fuck over my head. No, I
Oh.
just felt like I was totally punked by this book. It was because it was the neuroscience, the evolutionary theory, the semiotics of it, and what makes language different from other forms of signs and interpretive relationships, where a sign is about something to someone. Um, uh, he does give a more complicated explanation for how language would have evolved. It involves a lot of neuroscience. That was the part that made me cry because I didn't feel like I understood that stuff. But more than that, there are these things that are just so stories, and I don't think the one about the stoned ape holds up. Um, uh, as how you would end up with what we symbols are tokens of a type, so words of a language or symbols of a mathematical process. Those are symbols, and they are held together by social convention. Um, that is, dog doesn't mean anything intrinsically. It happens to be a word in our language. It's There are arbitrary marks that are not held as arbitrary. That what they refer to as anything but, well, it's somewhat arbitrary, but it's more specific. A dog does limit possibilities, a constraint on possibility sets. That is, if you're playing 20 questions and and figured out that it was a dog, that narrows possibility. So once again, my work is mostly around constraints, but I would think that it's more social constraints that would give us a need for symbols, and they would start out more as rituals, and I think they would probably have more to do with uh, sex, actually. Um, uh, uh, Not junkyard love, but boneyard loves.
I
But
like it.
that's
I like it.
um, uh, but even then, it's highly speculative. And I should say that my work is far less on how language evolved, but how language is different
Hmm.
and what it's like for us mid-sized mammals to be adapting under the drunken influence of language that I described earlier. It makes us incredibly prone to bad trips, as we'd be really anxious, and plenty prone to escapism. And I also, yeah, so I could definitely see a coevolution of mind altering drugs and language. Um, but I wouldn't say that it originated because someone got stoned and needed words for things. I
Right,
wouldn't
right.
guess that's probably right, or psychedelicized and needed words for things. I think that those are experiences a cat could have on catnip, and and yes, there are limitations to cat vocalization systems that would quite limit. I mean, so part of what it took for us to become the primates that speak is lucky accidents around our vocal cords and all of that,
Mhm.
and cognitive changes that enable us to stop involuntary sounds, um, and generate words instead. So it takes a kind of constraint on spontaneous vocalization, and we still have a bunch of spontaneous vocalization. So moaning and orgasm, screaming, crying, all of that stuff, the stuff that babies do, laughing, all of that is involuntary still. And the most interesting part of that for me is prosody, which is da 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 da, the music that underlies it. That it's the
Mm.
emotional carrier wave for our words. Really interesting stuff.
Cadence and tonality and that sort
And
of
all
thing.
that stuff is called prosody, and it's involuntary. I mean, I could fake it. I could come, it's easily faked, but we mostly let it ride automatically. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's
Yeah. Oh man, dude, thanks for indulging me on that. The language is just so fascinating. Terrence McKenna, again with Terrence McKenna, he talked
yeah,
about he was given this example in one of his lectures about like kind of cadence into intonality, and he was like, what did he do? It was like sneego sneaka no knife and no. He like made up this little language as
sure.
an example to communicate. You don't know what I was saying. I wasn't actually saying anything, but you kind of could connect with the tonality of it, of like I'm expressing some sort of emotion or
Sure, which is, and that's a whole lot of the signaling that we're actually paying attention to. I mean, I would see what struck me as I wrote this book about psychoproctology is that's driving not just um, the tonality, but also it's the prime driver on what we say. There's a conceit out there that everybody means what they say and could define every word of what they say. No, that's not how we mostly operate with
uh-huh.
language. We're basically animals braying, and we happen to bray in language. I mean, I don't mean to sound cynical or fatalistic about it, but I want to appreciate how much of what we say ends up coming about because we heard something that we can ape or parrot. It gets us what we want. It becomes a habit that we say it. Um, it's it's especially if it works. That means that if we can get away with it, if we find a way to say something that enables us to get our way, it will become our way of saying things. We'll keep on saying it. And how do we get our way with it? It's by other people thinking we actually mean the words. So
Mm.
um, a lot of what I focus on, this actually makes the psychoproctology work easy to do because it's extremely non-denominational. It's nonpartisan. Um, it's a generic habit where you're simply braying, and braying you've gotten away with braying because people think you're actually talking about words. It's not at all about what assholes believe. I actually don't think they have beliefs. I call them Trump bots. They are robotically employing fake trump cards. that is trumped up trump card. So the word Trump both means fake and means beats everything. And of course, for an organism that wants safety and freedom, that would be ideal. That you could do anything you want, whatever you do is safe and free. Yeah, some assholes dress up their beliefs in the lip service window dressing. I mean, they dress up their assholery in some ornamentation, like I belong to this ideology or religion or culture or whatever. But you don't even have to do that. I mean, if you're in a relationship where you're being asked to put out more than you want to, you'll just kind of start snarling and braying, and pretty soon you'll be an asshole. Does that mean that you're an asshole for a cause? No, you can be an asshole for a cause or not for a cause. The cause doesn't matter. It's not at all about what they claim to believe. It's how they strut it. It would be a natural human habit, if you could get away with it, to simply bray in words. And as long as people believe in civility and honor and respect and valuing other people's values and tolerance and all of that, you can get away with a whole lot of it. I believe in those things wholeheartedly. I believe in tolerance and listening to people. I believe in that with normal people, but I have to figure out whether I'm dealing with a normal people, because it's exactly the wrong thing to do with an asshole. It's totally enabling, and it's got us in a very dangerous situation worldwide. And I would say the same thing if Donald Trump was pandering to the left. It's got nothing to do with politics. It's simply,
Yes.
And I love him that way, because actually you could mistake Stalin for a communist or Hitler for an anti-Semite. No, they were assholes. But Trump is really hard to mistake for anything but an asshole. I mean, yes, you can if you want to believe in him, if you want the perfect safety and perfect freedom that he entitles you to through this form of, it's a very simple system of braying. But no, those beliefs don't matter. We can see that they don't matter because they use them for the preaching. They don't have any interest in practicing what they preach. So it would be true of it was true of Stalin. Stalin happened to be leftist in his ornamentation. Doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. We're talking about playing God being much easier than being human, and that's all. And you can play God really easy just by using words in a certain way that basically is what I'd call bullshit dosing. That is, you bullshit. You don't care what's true. That's not the issue for you. You're just bulldozing through.
Yeah. Oh man, fascinating. I really appreciate your explanation, and I love where you take it. I feel like it's like you kind of reading what I'm thinking about next, and you're pointing at it already. So, man, thank you so much. So what are you working on right now? Are you working on is your work on a-holes, is that published? That sounds so funny to say.
Yes and no. No, it is. Yes and no. I just got the proofs for the hard copy book back from my editor, but as my last edit on it, I recorded the whole thing as a podcast, or actually a podcast. The book, I let this book sneak up on me by pretending I was doing it as a class. So I wrote it kind of as a class, advanced psychoproctology for beginners. I'm still working on the title, but the book, if anybody wants the book from me, once again, I don't need status and I don't need money from this. I do like to have as much audience as I can for the amount of effort I put into it. And I also, more than that, because I think it's useful. It's not, I mean, I think it's the missing piece right now in the puzzle. That is the biggest crisis we're dealing with, is that we've never quite figured out how to humbly humble people who will say or do anything to avoid humility. That is the big question. And if we don't answer that, I think we're as good as extinct. I mean, I just don't think we can, I don't think we have the resources to run out one more flight of fancy that taken into reality the way that just keeps on happening. So I would love to get that work out. So you can find all of my work. You can find way too much of my work simply by just Googling my name. You'll find all these articles I write at Psychology Today. I have a YouTube channel on psychoproctology, a YouTube channel on origins of life research, or origins of trying research. I have a website I'm building that's coming along nicely. It's at jeremysherman.com. There you'll find my 8 big research questions, and the media page is fully populated with all sorts of stuff. I'm also on Facebook quite reliably, because I write most of my essays as memes. I mean, I just ended up with a kind of a bumper sticker mind. So I put out like 10 or 15 memes a day on Instagram um and elsewhere. So that's a place to find me if you want. Um and what am I working on now? All cylinders. That is, I'm working on this book right now. Today, I'm working on an article that I'm submitting to a journal next week, an academic journal, on this third scientific revolution, how we bring rigor to categorization. Um, uh, um, yeah, just every other day or so, I take a walk with Terry where we're working out a big chunk of his new work, which is on what I'll call synergenesis, which is explaining how wholes come together from parts, how multicellularity or romance happens, or how societies end up with people in effect addicted to each other, or elements, agents addicted to each other. So how does synergy happen? And once again, evolutionary psych or evolutionary theory in general says, well, it happens because it's useful. And we're saying, no, that doesn't explain how organisms surrender their autonomy to become parts of larger whole. So this is Terry's current book. It's called Falling Up. He's writing it as falling, meaning that we believe that a lot of it happens from losing the ability to do for yourself because of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
available ability of something else. And that
Giving
would
in.
apply.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that applies to everything from why humans are addicted to external sources of vitamin C, because we came in contact with fruit and lost the ability to generate our own vitamin C. After all, you don't have to. Yeah, we don't have to give. You don't have to give cats or dogs or elephants vitamin C. You have to give it to primates because they lost the ability. We know that we have lost. We can trace the DNA, and yeah, we've lost the ability because we got it from another source. It's also how in a relationship you can end up losing your ability to be self-affirming because you're addicted to someone, because someone else is self-affirming you can actually lose your ability, and then when the relationship ends, you have to regenerate. You got kind of going cold turkey off an external source of affirmation, and you have to get back to where you can regenerate your own mojo. So these are, and it also explains why I'm stuck addicted to grocery stores. My ancestors used to farm, but then there were two ways to get food. One was farms and the other was stores. And I lost the ability to farm. I could get it back. It's different in different situations.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a big chunk of our work these days, synergenesis, explaining how synergies happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, that sounds so great. Me and a friend of mine who's an armchair philosopher, we always talk about like we're gonna be smart old men, and we always talk about one day we're gonna be just like old guys sitting at a drinking tea together and discussing the nature of reality. And I feel like you guys are living my hopeful goal for when I'm older. That's awesome.
I feel lucky. I have to admit, it's luck. I just ended up
So
with a
cool.
life where I happened to stumble into right opportunities, and yeah, it's not a life for everyone, but for me, the best use of a discretionary time is sitting on the front porch of the universe, speculating about it and us in it, which is what we've been doing, and that's a good use of a life. Taking notes. We're the only things that can, because we have language. We
Yeah.
can really take notes on the whole ball of wax and us in it.
Right.
I love playing music, but I actually like this stuff. This feels good too, is what I want to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. It's all play. It's all just
Yeah.
such fun play, and you
And
kind of get somewhere with it. It seems like.
yeah, that's
doesn't
right. And for me, so it's the oxymoron of serious play. There's
it?
this play within constraints.
Yeah.
Um, uh, because a whole lot. I mean, I'll talk to philosophers who will tell me. I got in a debate with one philosopher, and he said, "Well, to me, it's all just poetry." I said, "Thank you, man. That explains to. I don't. I know that if it's all just poetry to you, then we're not really talking about what's real. I'll fuss elsewhere because I don't need to try and persuade you. If it's all just poetry, right on. Go. That's just play. If it's all. I love poetry. I write doggerel every day almost. But no, I'm thinking of this as a serious play, trying to get closer and closer to understanding what reality is, and not that we'll ever get good at, not that we'll ever nail it.
But to at least dance, at least to
Yeah,
step on the dance floor and
yeah,
check it out,
all that sort of stuff.
Oh man. Okay. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your perspective on so many of these things. You definitely, I mean, just from me being introduced for you to you through the podcast thing. I'm a fan already, but now, I mean, just what we talked about, I'm definitely going to keep diving into your work and listening, man.
It's a delight to meet you. Stay in touch. I'm I'm easy. I'm easy. I'm around.
Cool.
Okay. And yeah, take care.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me on your show. A
Yeah,
pleasure
yeah,
to be here.
of course. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. We'll be in touch via email, and yeah, man, take care, and thank you so much again, listeners. Take care of yourself, love yourself, drink some dang water, stretch, go outside, go for a walk, and contemplate the universe from the front porch. Take care.